Hey, Jonathan here. Wanted to talk today about pleasure and desire. Specifically, I want to talk about pleasure and desire around those things that are around us in day to day life, and we're constantly wanting them, and maybe they're not so good for us. This could be food, this could be sex, this could be um, people, this could be a job, an object, this could be any one of a million different things. It could include drugs and alcohol, it could include a life that we think we should be living. Desire is a huge thing for all of us. It's one of our fundamental instincts as animals to desire pleasure in whatever form we perceive pleasure to come, whether it's potato chips or a mansion. and our other instinct is, of course, to avoid pain. And I think most of us can recognize the source of pain, generally speaking, except that a lot of times pleasure and pain objects get mixed in together, right? So, you crave some foods or drugs or alcohol that aren't so good for you. You want that person that isn't so good for you, right? You crave that person because they fulfill something, they bring some sort of pleasure. You desire the pleasure aspect of them, and then you fall into the negative aspect of them. I know it's a huge deal in everybody's life, and I don't want to belittle the fundamentalness of this particular issue. I want to in fact emphasize how huge this issue is for everybody, so that when you continuously desire something that you're unconsciously perhaps perceiving as pleasurable, you don't feel bad about it, at least, because it's fundamental to every single person. And I think it's fundamental for each one of us to understand that being angry with ourselves and shaming ourselves for wanting something that maybe at one point was pleasurable and isn't anymore, or whatever it is, that shaming and angering ourselves, being angry with ourselves, creates a downward spiral that creates kind of an attitude of what's the point, and you kind of stop trying. You lose that willpower. It stops being available to you as you shame yourself, as you get angry with yourself over not being able to resist perhaps the desired object, or resist the person that's not so good for you in your life. That's the fundamental, most important thing to address when dealing with desire, and desiring specifically things that we perceive to be pleasurable or unconsciously perceive to be pleasurable, but probably aren't really good for us at the end of the day. So the fundamental, most important thing that you can do in this situation is not be angry with yourself and not shame yourself for succumbing to that desire. It's the single most basic instinct in your mind, and there's no shame in having a process around reconditioning yourself when it comes to desire, and specifically, of course, desiring objects or people or things that aren't that good for you. The more advanced kind of long-term solution to reprogramming your desires is the recognition that you are not your desires. And most of you, I'm sure, have probably heard this before. It's not news, Buddha talked about this 2,500 years ago, right? And thousands of years before that, sages have been saying the same thing. You are not your desires. Now, what does that mean, though? And how can you apply that to yourself right now in this moment where you're about to go off with that person once again that isn't good for you, or you're about to eat that thing that isn't good for you, or you're about to, in worse situations, drink or take that drug that isn't so good for you, or, et cetera, right? This place of seeing the true essence of yourself is really the most core solution you'll ever have. So connecting to stillness, empty space, letting go of your identity is the long-term solution for any of these pleasure addictions. And it's a big job. I'm not pretending like I'm providing the whole path of doing that. Right now, of course, so many wiser people than me have provided paths for that. It's probably the single most important spiritual teaching that there is that there exists, where you are seeing finally that you are not your desires. But just knowing that if you can focus on telling yourself, I am not my desires, 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 when that happens, and seeing how this object or person might give you some kind of pleasure, and you have to admit, like, what is the pleasure aspect of this person or object? Like, is it the flavor? Is it the way that person holds you in a certain way but then treats you in a toxic way after that? So is it fundamentally looking to see what that specific component is that is pleasurable to you, naming it, name that specific thing that is pleasurable to you, and that will create a lot less tension within you if you can specifically see, oh, I desire that about that person, that feels good to me, and you can start to separate that particular feeling good from the whole picture and the addiction to whatever it is that isn't that great for you. And then kind of in a longer term, right, of course, connecting to your inner voice, doing the practices that allow you to shed your identity around your desires and your thoughts, however that path comes to you, in whichever way. Some of you, I know, have downloaded the Embody Freedom meditation that I created. That's one way of bringing a certain energy into your body, kind of liberating your heart and entering into the silence of your heart. And of course, there are a million other practices that you can do for that, and there are a million other paths that you can walk for that. I can't, of course, offer them all in this short video. I hope that's helpful. Just the simple practice of naming that which you desire about that specific thing will help you separate yourself out and separate out that particular pleasurable aspect, and the addiction will lessen to some degree. Try it out, please try it out. And try it out in your imagination first. It's always good to rehearse. So imagine yourself faced with that dilemma, that food, that object, that person, and separating out what it is that you find pleasurable about that person or thing or food that isn't good for you in the long run, consciously isn't good for you in the long run, and naming the pleasurable thing, and maybe even asking yourself, okay, where can I find that pleasure in a healthy way? Thanks again. Any questions, comments, always welcome. Love to have them. That's how I get inspiration for making more of these videos. I hope they're helpful. Always nice to know that. Keeps me going. Blessings. Thanks again.